Hello, today I'm going to give you a tour of Rally Hero's Developer Portal. The Developer Portal is your one-stop shop to manage your game's live operations, such as managing items, loot, currency, setting up your matchmaking rules, and so forth. The Developer Portal is also what you'll use to see how well your game is performing on the platform, as well as this is what your customer service team will use to support your player base. We'll touch on each of these things as part of this walkthrough. But before we start, I want to mention that the developer portal is driven off RESTful APIs. This means if you have any external tooling your team is used to using, you could easily connect those tools to our APIs. On that note, I want to clarify that Rally here has two sets of APIs. And what drives the developer portal is what we call our developer APIs. So if you have any external tooling that you would want to use, you would have those tools connect to our developers API. To start, when you log in, you'll be presented with a screen like this. This is your products page. So whether you're a studio that has one game or multiple games, you will have a product per game. In our case, we only have one product. Let's click on it. This will navigate you to the products dashboard. Here you have various options. On the left-hand menu, you'll find your policies and clients. Policies are permissions that can be assigned to a client, limiting what it can do. Out of the box, we have a few already defined, such as a generic policy for game clients. But here is where you will create policies with various permissions for your use case. Then, after you have your policies created, you could go in and create your clients. This is also where you will get your credentials that will allow your clients to authenticate with the system. All right, so let's navigate back to the products dashboard and talk about environments and sandboxes. Environments are the physical infrastructure that the backend services will be running on. You may have one or more, depending on how far along you are developing your game. You may have an environment for development, a QA, a playtest, alpha, and if you're further along, you may have a production environment. Sandboxes, on the other hand, are configuration templates. This concept provides teams an easy way to harden configuration before promoting it to your production environment. When you're ready to promote that configuration to production, it is an easy configuration flip of which sandbox the environment is referencing. An easy way to think about this is say that you have a dev sandbox, and think of that as your main line. When you're ready to branch a release, you will take a copy of the developer sandbox and name it the same as your release. You want to try to keep the naming convention as close as possible. This just makes it, there's no hard rule on what name to use. This is just a best practices concept, so it helps your other teams keep track of what release a specific configuration is tied to, or sandbox is tied to. Then when you update your QA environment to point to this new sandbox, from there, your QA, your publishing team will then harden that configuration as it goes through the development lifecycle. As your release gets propagated from one environment to the other, you will just point that environment to this new sandbox that is being hardened until you're ready to release. On the day of release, all that is left is to point your production environment to this new sandbox. And then once you make that configuration change, our services will pick up the configs within a minute or two, depending on which service it is. What this does is it saves a lot of hours for your team to validate after your game has been released, just to make sure that everything is working as expected. All right, so let's dive into sandboxes, and we'll come back to environments in just a bit. Like I mentioned earlier, sandboxes are a configuration template. And this is where you would go to manage your configuration for catalog, game flow, matchmaking. We have this laid out such that it translates very well to what we reference within the integration plugin itself. So when you expand out catalog, this is where you'll find the configuration screens for items, which is a base entity of a virtual good or asset that can be given to a player. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that a player can see. Think of something like a progression item. That would have to be at first be configured as an item, and then that in order for you to grant that item to a player, you would then have to create a loot definition. And a loot definition is just configuration how you want to add or modify a player's inventory. Vendors is a way to group loot together. Think of bundles that you may want to create, something that may have premium currency, a cosmetic, a weapon, and so forth, right? This is something that a player can obtain through a chest roll or maybe something that they can buy through an in-game store. Vendors can also allow you to create more sophisticated definitions, such as being able to check to see if a player actually has the premium battle pass before you grant them the premium XP. Then we have our XP tables. XP tables is a way to translate XP into levels. And if you combine XP tables with some of the other configuration that we talked about through vendors, loot, and then associate those to the actual base item, the engine allows you to reward players when they hit specific milestones. So say, for example, you have a reward vendor that gives out rewards at level 1, at level 5, at 10, and so forth. So what this will allow us to, what the system will do is take all of this configuration points, combine them so that when a person reaches level 1, it'll automatically grant that person the reward that they need, as well as when they hit level 5 and 10 and so forth. Rule sets is a way for you to configure how you want to manage real money purchases. This is how we handle like our cross-platform commerce of which currency can only be, what type of currency can only be used for a specific platform. Sony, for example, is very strict about this. So if you actually have real money purchases through Sony, you can only use that currency through Sony. As well, this is also where you would go to create platform exclusive, like your platform exclusive rule. So again, tied to a marketing campaign that you may have with Sony, such that only this cosmetic is available for PlayStation users. You create those platform exclusive contents here. Pricing configuration is how you would go in to configure your various price points for items that players can purchase through in-game vendors or a store. You can have it configured such that a specific price point uses just earned currency, or another price point that just uses premium currency. It also allows you to configure price points with a mixture of both. Entitlement SKUs is where you would go to configure how we need to translate something that is purchased through the first platform providers. For example, you may be selling something on Xbox. So when we authenticate the player against Xbox, we check to see what entitlements we need to process. And then based on the SKUs that they pass down, we know what we need to give to the player. The system also allows you to configure external key campaigns. This is where you go in to set up things like your Twitch drops. The next few screens are around session management as well as matchmaking. Session templates is where you would go in and create your various session types. We don't have any limits to how many session types you can have, but this is something where you go in and create, say, your browser, a game browser, or an actual game session, or a social hub, or party session. Map selection list are where you would configure maps, and then for matchmaking, you may want to rotate maps around. This is where you would go in and create your match selection list. Then under matchmaking, you have things such as, do you want to do rank play and everything like that? You want to create your profiles and queues. These are the things that the players will be joining, and then go through additional rules on how they need to be match made. Deserter is, do you want to turn Deserter on for competitive play? And then through advanced matchmaking and cross-play, this allows you to create additional rules on how you want players to get matched together, such as you don't want to have players on PC or keyboard and mouse to match with players on console or gamepads. You want to keep those two player bases aside. Maybe there's a competitive advantage over one or the other. So you have a lot of flexibility around how you want to manage that, and all of those configurations are done here. Game config allows you to go in and specify your information for how we need to connect to Steam, Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox, and so forth. KV editors. So we talked through all these various configurations that we allow. The one thing I forgot to mention is each of these configuration points allow you to also define custom data that you would want to include, that you may want to include that's not tied to what Rally here provides as meta configurations. Key value allows you to extend the functionality such that we have all of these various configuration points, but there are other configuration pieces that you want to send to the game client. So you would define what that key is and value, and then you're able to control that through the portal itself. The cool thing about all of these configurations, if the sandbox is associated to an environment, the environment will pick up any changes that you make within a minute or two of saving it. So think of something that you're doing like an A/B test within the game client itself. You're able to, or you have implemented a new feature, but there was something going on, and you want to flip that feature off. You're able to control a lot of that through the KV editor, because this is when the game client asks for configuration, it's going to pull down the configuration that you have defined in the KVs. Game event is tied to our analytics system. Out of the box, we provide game events. I'm sorry, gets events. And these things are like your login event, client device event. We have matchmaking events. But there are also going to be things that are going to be very specific to your game. And this is where you would go in and configure those events as well as define those schemas. The reason why we do it this way is so that we're able to do the schema validation for you. You're not having to do that on your own. Um, Settings is another avenue to store player information. Think of player loadouts, key bindings, additional player settings, player state information that are not captured by any of the other pieces that we provide. And all of this is custom to what you'd want to do within the game itself. We then have custom endpoints and roles. Custom endpoints is a way for you to have the client call an endpoint, a custom endpoint on our side that's hosted through, like I say, an Azure function or something like that, that directly connects to our backend services. That allows you to do a lot more logic that we may not provide. So it's just a way for you to it's just a way for you to add custom logic before you want to do something. And so this way, your clients connect to an authenticated endpoint, which then has a trusted connection to our backend system. We also have the concept of roles. You're able to create something like your Grandmaster role and then give it specific permissions. And then all of those, whenever you're pulling the role information for that player, those permissions get pushed to the game client or the game server itself. All right, so let's navigate back to the products dashboard and talk about environments. As I mentioned, environments are the actual physical infrastructure that our backend services run on. And the first place that you'll be navigated to is this dashboard. And if you had a production environment or a live environment, this dashboard is very helpful, because what this provides is a current insights to what your current CCU is, how many new players you have within a sliding window, what your DAU is within a sliding window, as well as monetization if you actually have in-game purchasing. And the monetization table here shows the actual entitlements being processed by the system. Going into settings, this is where you would actually go to change your sandbox. So early on, we talked about sandbox being the configuration template and how that makes it very easy for configurations to be propagated and hardened to get you ready on the day of a release. And then on the day of a release, it is a simple change here for flipping it from one to the other. And as I mentioned, as you make that change, the services would pick up the configuration within a minute or two. You then have the support tool. The support tool is where your customer service team will go to manage any player support case. So here's, for example, I'm going to pull up my test user. You're able to search for their username as well as other various ways to look up the player. So the first area that I'm going to dive into is the person screen. The person screen allows the customer service representative to handle things like GDPR delete, banning them, as well as seeing if they've linked various accounts, what their history are, promoting, say, for example, for cross progression, and you have multiple accounts linked, which one set as the primary. They're able to check the history of all of that. Going back of screen and then diving into the player UI. Player UI opens up a lot of more additional things where they could go in and see what their inventory history is, what their order history is, session information, match information, things like that. This is also where they would come in, say, for example, a player submits a support case of, hey, I reached level 10, but I did not get the rewards that I was supposed to. This allows the support team to come in, validate that player did reach level 10, and then to take the necessary actions of granting the player the reward that they were supposed to get. Going back to the portal, we then have the insights, or the Rally Here Insights, which navigates you to a Grafana dashboard. And what we've done here is we've created various dashboards that give you a little bit more of a deeper look into how well your game is performing. We have dashboards set up for matchmaking, things like how long are players waiting in a queue, what type of matches they're queued up for, how many players are actually in a match itself, how long those matches are taking, how many sessions are players in, and then you're able to slice and dice them by region, by queue types, and things like that. Then you also have some of the more, hey, in-depth user information of your CCU, where this will give you not just what your current CCU totals are, but also more of your line diagram of, based on the window that you've selected, you're able to backtrack to see how well your game's been performing in like a 7-day to 14-day window. You're also able to look at purchasing information. Again, purchasing here is really tied to entitlements processing. Going back to the portal, the last couple of things I wanted to touch on is, as you're going through the quick start guide, one of the things that the quick start guide will walk you through is to provide the environment information for what environment the game client's connecting to. That can be easily found right here in the top right hand corner, where you got your environment base URL. You could just click this purple button on the side and that will copy the URL path for you. In addition, on the bottom left-hand corner, you'll find a way to submit your support cases as well as access documentation, and then also a link to our Git repository for the actual SDK plugin. And then last bit is this tools. The tools piece allows you to wrapper your credentials and unwrap them, so that way you're able to share those across. That concludes our walkthrough of the developer portal. Thank you.